Have you ever heard of a millionaire who adopted a silicone baby? No, you didn't misread that. A 72-year-old executive, owner of billion-dollar companies, decided to become a father, but not in the way you're thinking. He had a luxury. Nursery built, hired a nanny, created a daily care routine, all of this for a reborn baby. Madness, loneliness, a late life breakdown. Hold on. What looked like eccentricity was hiding a deep story. A story of pain, abandonment, and love. Love without labels, real love. In this video, you'll follow the journey of a man who traded wealth for connection, who rediscovered purpose in something the entire world mocked. And the ending? Well, it will hit you where it hurts. If you think you've seen it all, wait until you find out why he chose symbolic adoption. Because maybe, just maybe, you'll realize that love doesn't need logic, it just needs courage. At 72 years old, Richard Hammond was the picture of what many would call success. Owner of a billion-dollar holding company, he spent his days making decisions that moved markets and leading meetings from afar, surrounded by screens, graphs, and spreadsheets. He lived in a silent mansion, surrounded by security and fine art, waking up every day with a full schedule and an empty soul. No parties, no spontaneous laughter, just him, his black coffee, and the muffled sound of incoming emails. His routine was methodical. Wake at 5, read the financial papers, give orders to directors he barely knew, and review spreadsheets late into the night. The fortune he built over decades gave him everything except meaning. There was no one to share. Dinner with, no one to wait for at the end of the day. His cars slept in the garage. His overseas home stayed locked, and the hallways of his mansion echoed with an almost suffocating absence. The classic lonely millionaire, rich in assets, poor in connection, and deep down, Richard knew it. He knew that relentless pace wasn't just about loving work, it was a distraction, a way to avoid facing the mirror and admitting that wealth without emotional bonds is like a glass castle in the middle of nowhere. The lack of connection, the existential exhaustion, the silence. It all whispered that something was missing. Something he couldn't even name, but had been aching for a long time. Despite his image as a tough executive, Richard had always carried a secret, the quiet dream of becoming a father. Not the kind who shows up only on holidays or sends expensive gifts, but the kind who teaches a kid to ride a bike, who listens to bedtime stories without checking the time. It was an old, almost childlike wish he buried under lines like, "It's not the right time," or "My lifestyle doesn't allow it." But that moment never came. And as the years passed, the emotional emptiness only screamed louder. He remembered the times he held his friends' children and felt a sharp sting in his chest, like a piece of him was missing. Every toothless smile, every clingy hug from a child stirred up a mix of tenderness and sadness. Richard knew he had been good at business, but often wondered if he could be good at emotions. He feared it might be too late to try. The idea of symbolic fatherhood, something outside the norm, was beginning to make more sense than he expected. Even surrounded by success, it was the everyday scenes that touched him most. A father pushing a stroller in the park, a grandfather reading to a grandchild. That kind of love without labels, unpretentious, no contracts or meetings required. Something he had never lived but always admired from a distance. And so, in the quiet moments between spreadsheets and long-held regrets, Richard began to allow himself to dream of something that might still be possible. Richard had never been a coward. He made decisions that affected thousands of employees, faced economic crises, and won brutal corporate battles. But when it came to building a family, fear spoke louder. Not fear of love at time, but of the world. He looked around and saw an unstable planet, hollow relationships, values falling apart. How could he bring a new life into such coldness, selfishness, and rush? He believed being a real father took more than affection. It took courage. But how do you protect a child in a world where even love feels disposable? Headlines of violence, broken families, digital loneliness, all of it built an invisible wall between him and the dream of forming a real bond. So he pulled back. hid in the comfort of better not to risk it. But inside, the longing only grew stronger. It was in this inner conflict, the desire to love and the fear of hurting, that he began to explore alternatives. Was there a way to experience fatherhood without exposing a child to the world's cruelty? A way to live genuine affection, even symbolically? He didn't know the answer, not yet. But one night, flipping through channels with no expectations, he saw something that would change everything. The night was cold, and the silence of the mansion felt heavier than usual. As always, Richard was watching documentaries, his favorite escape. Then he stumbled upon one about reborn babies. At first it seemed strange, hyper-realistic dolls treated like children. But as stories of emotional healing and personal transformation unfolded, something inside him stirred. He found himself moved, not even understanding why. There was a woman who overcame grief by cradling a silicone baby, an elderly man who rediscovered purpose through symbolic fatherhood, a young adult who battled depression by forming a bond with a reborn. Richard felt a lump in his throat. This wasn't about toys. It was about genuine affection, about the possibility of living an unusual love that, despite breaking norms, was still legitimate, a kind of unexpected empathy that broke through judgment. As the documentary progressed, the idea began to evolve inside him. This wasn't madness. It was an alternative form of therapy, a transformational experience for those brave enough to feel. Quietly, Richard began researching, diving into the reborn world with a curiosity he hadn't felt in years. And for the first time, in a long time, he felt hope. Something about it just made sense. And he wasn't going to stop there. After entire nights spent secretly researching, Richard made the decision. It wasn't impulsive, nor out of a moment of weakness. It was an inner calling, deep and clear, as if his heart had found a path. He contacted an artist who specialized in reborn dolls and requested the most realistic model possible. Closed eyes, simulated breathing, accurate weight, delicate skin texture. It was like a late adoption, symbolic, yes, but no less serious. He wanted everything in fine detail. He chose the skin tone, the shape of the face, individual strands of hair implanted one by one. He didn't want a doll. He wanted his son. That's what he told the artist with a conviction that surprised even himself. That moment marked the official start of his emotional journey, a journey that blended real love with the bravery to face public judgment. Many would call it excessive, maybe even insane. But for Richard, it was more than alternative therapy. It was a rediscovery of purpose, a chance to become an unconventional father, a father by heart, and live a kind of true fatherhood, even without biology. And as the reborn baby neared completion, day after day, he already felt different. As if, finally, he was about to fill that long-standing emotional void. The day arrived like a symbolic birth. The box, carefully packaged, was delivered to his mansion door at 7 in the morning. Richard held it with trembling hands, not from fear but raw emotion. He brought the box to the nursery he had prepared days earlier and turned on a camera. He wanted to record everything. In that moment, he wasn't the cold executive anymore. He was an unconventional father, about to meet the son he had chosen with his heart. When he opened the lid, his eyes welled up. There was the reborn baby, asleep, perfect, serene, with an expression that brought peace. The silicone skin's texture took his breath away. Holding the baby in his arms, he felt warmth rise through his chest, a symbolic connection so intense he couldn't even explain it. "This is the purest connection I've ever felt," he whispered to the camera, his voice trembling. And in that moment, something inside him was reborn too. This wasn't just about having a reborn doll. It was about allowing himself to feel, to love even outside the norm, even if the world didn't understand. There, in the silence of that room, a 72-year-old man was experiencing what many never do in a lifetime: love without labels, a true connection that needs no explanation. And as he cradled the reborn as if it were flesh and blood, Richard knew this was only the beginning. Richard spared no effort. If he was going to live out this symbolic fatherhood, he would give it everything. He hired a team of top designers, the same ones who designed presidential suites and five-star hotels. He asked for a nursery that was elegant, cozy, but with soul. The crib was handmade in Italy, carved from light wood. The linens? French. Pure linen, delicate, with the initials E.H., the letters he chose for the baby's name. The walls were covered in custom watercolor wallpaper, soft tones, nature illustrations, all chosen to create an atmosphere of calm and connection. The lighting was soft and warm, like a gentle embrace. He paid attention to every detail, as if he were preparing a home for a real soul, and in a way, he was, because even though it was just a silicone baby, that room breathed real love. Close friends were puzzled. All this for a doll? But to Richard, it was more than decoration. It was part of an emotional healing he didn't even know he needed. It was about filling both a physical and symbolic space in his home and in his heart. There, among cloth diapers and storybooks, a different kind of family was being born. And silently, Richard began to believe that this real fatherhood might just be the beginning. Yes, he took it seriously. More than people expected. Richard hired a professional nanny, someone experienced in childcare and, more importantly, willing to care for a reborn baby without judgment. It wasn't easy to find someone with enough unexpected empathy to grasp the symbolic weight of his journey. But he found her. A kind, sensitive woman named Mary, who upon seeing the nursery and the baby simply said, "I understand, and it will be an honor." Mary embraced the tasks naturally. She prepared symbolic bottles, gave warm baths with care, changed outfits, and spoke to the reborn as if it were truly alive. And Richard, watching it all, felt a mix of gratitude and awe. He never thought anyone else could truly understand such an unconventional choice, but there she was, caring with genuine affection, as if she too could see the beauty in this uncommon kind of love. Some said it was over the top, that the lonely billionaire had lost his mind, that it was pure escapism. But what no one knew was that for Richard this was a form of personal reconstruction. A brave decision to care, even symbolically, a way to overcome prejudice, even his own. And with Mary by his side, he began to live a routine he had never imagined possible. The routine was taken seriously, almost like a sacred ritual. Every day at 7 a.m., Richard woke up, prepared the nursery, picked out the day's outfit, and spent a few quiet moments watching the reborn with a kind of tenderness that defied explanation. Sometimes he read aloud. Other times he simply held the baby in silence, listening to the birds outside. There was something therapeutic in it, something that calmed a heart hardened by decades of control. Before lunch, they'd go for short walks in the garden. He pushed the stroller with careful attention, as if every gesture carried emotional weight. It wasn't just a doll. It was a reconnection with something he didn't even know he had lost. In the afternoon, Mary would take over, and in the evenings they read bedtime stories by dim light, as if preparing someone real to fall asleep. It was symbolic fatherhood, but the love was real. To outsiders it might have looked ridiculous, but inside that house everything felt authentic. Every detail of the routine showed how deeply Richard had immersed himself in this transformative experience. His time with the reborn became a way to rediscover his purpose. There was no rush, no judgment, just a man and his honest attempt to live a different kind of love. And deep down, he began to realize what he felt might be more real than anyone could imagine. It didn't take long for the story to leak. A reclusive billionaire, 72 years old, caring for a silicone baby as if it were real. It was perfect clickbait for controversial headlines. Eccentric, childish, delusional, those were just some of the words used by columnists and influencers. On social media, reactions ranged from laughter to mockery. Many laughed, others judged, but few tried to understand what was truly behind it. Richard, unlike what people expected, never defended himself. He simply said calmly, "I'm doing what my heart asked me to do." He wasn't looking for applause, let alone approval. His real fatherhood, even if symbolic, didn't need anyone's explanation. It was about genuine affection, about personal healing. Yes, the judgment hurt, but not as much as the emptiness of a life without emotional bonds. Curiously, some people started to relate. Messages of empathy began to surface. People who also felt alone, who also sought alternative therapies, who also needed to find love in unexpected places. Amid the noise, a new kind of conversation was born. A conversation about unconventional ways to love. But the biggest surprise was yet to come. And it would come from someone he least expected. The first time Richard's sister saw the nursery, she was in shock. "You're serious?" she asked, trying to stay composed. He simply nodded, holding the reborn in his arms, as if no words were needed. Some friends tried to understand. Others walked away for good. The idea of a non-traditional father caring for a silicone baby with such devotion was simply too much for them. For many, it was unthinkable. Some people called just to criticize, sent him therapist recommendations, and even made his story the butt of jokes at lavish dinner parties. But others simply stayed quiet and listened. One old college friend visited the house and stood in quiet awe as Richard cradled the reborn. "I've never seen you so peaceful," he said. That unexpected empathy, from someone he never imagined, said more than any argument. Each reaction taught him something. He learned that true love, and even when symbolic, scares people, because it breaks rules, because it makes them uncomfortable, because it makes them think. Symbolic fatherhood exposed the softness of a man who had worn a suit of armor his entire life. And the more people criticized him, the more Richard connected to what he truly felt. But nothing prepared him for what happened just days later. During what was supposed to be a routine business trip, it was just a business trip. 3 days away, a packed schedule, important meetings. But on the first night, alone in his luxury hotel room, Richard felt an ache in his chest he couldn't explain. He was used to traveling, so what was different now? He realized he missed the baby, the routine, the quiet room. He missed everything that had once felt strange and now felt like a part of him. Mary sent photos, the reborn in its crib, dressed in the little blue onesie he loved, a picture of the stroller in the sunlit garden, and Richard got emotional. He felt a real absence, almost physical, as if he'd left a part of himself back home. And for the first time, the man who ran business empires felt the urge to drop everything and go back, not out of fear, but out of love. A kind of love he never thought possible for something not born of blood. The trip ended, but he came back different, softer, more present, more aware of what he was living. This was no longer a test. It was a symbolic connection that had turned into a deep emotional bond. Richard realized that despite the silicone, despite the critics and the disbelief, what he felt was real. And deep down, a question began to rise. If this was possible with a reborn, what else could be? One rainy afternoon, with the reborn baby asleep in its crib and the house wrapped in sacred silence, Richard finally faced an old truth, a wound buried under decades of work and achievement. He had never known his father. Grew up with absence. Knocking at his door, a hole in his chest that never closed. He was abandoned as a baby and raised by a stern mother who did what she could. But affection was scarce, almost non-existent. For years he pretended it didn't matter. That being strong was enough. But deep down, that abandonment shaped everything. How he loved, how he struggled to open up, the constant fear of repeating the same cycle. The reborn baby then wasn't just a symbolic gesture. It was a repair, a way to give to another, even if just a doll, what he had never received. This was more than symbolic fatherhood. It was emotional healing, personal restoration. He looked at the reborn and said words he had never heard. "You're safe, I'm here, you're not alone." And every word that left his mouth also soothed the little boy inside him, the one who had waited for comfort and never got it. The unusual love he felt was real, and even more, it was freeing. And in that whirlwind of memories and emotions, Richard began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, he was finally ready to live something beyond symbolism, At first, he told himself it was just an emotional experiment, a way to ease the emptiness. But as the days passed, something inside Richard truly began to change. What started as symbolic fatherhood began to feel real, not in the physical sense, but in the emotional one. He caught himself watching the reborn sleep for long minutes, feeling a kind of peace even multi-million-dollar deals had never brought him. It was pure. It was simple. It was true. The silicone no longer felt strange. The weight in his arms became familiar. And the love that once seemed impossible for a rational man became natural. Richard started acting like a father without realizing that he created routines, protected that emotional space fiercely, even stopped receiving visitors. He wasn't just playing a role, he was feeling it, for real. As if the reborn had awakened a dormant instinct, an ancient desire that finally made sense. It was like rehearsal, training for what could come next. He realized he could in fact be gentle, attentive, present. And with that came an unexpected courage. The courage to step out of the symbolic and into reality. The label-free love that had been born. There had prepared him for something greater. Because what started as alternative therapy, that symbolic connection, was paving the way for a real decision, one that would change everything. It was an ordinary night. A light dinner, dim lights, the reborn baby in the armchair he had custom made. Richard looked at his son and felt peace, but also a strange restlessness. Something whispered inside him, what if it were real? He took a deep breath, sipped his wine, and sat in the silence. For the first time, silence didn't feel empty. It felt like an invitation, a calling. And there, between the ticking clock and the warmth of the room, he made the most courageous decision of his life. He didn't want to simulate love anymore. He wanted to live it, in its rawest, most intense, most unpredictable form. He wanted to hold a real child, with real tears, with laughter that echoed, with the scent of shampoo and fussing in the middle of the night. The reborn wouldn't be discarded. It had been the beginning, the awakening. But now Richard wanted more. He wanted a bond of flesh, soul, and story. He wanted to be a real father. Age didn't matter. Judgment didn't matter. What mattered was love. He began researching late adoptions. He called institutions, spoke with social workers, studied the legal process. His eyes were steady. He was ready. Not for status, not for appearances, but because he had rebuilt himself from the inside out. The once lonely millionaire, who had only known affection through spreadsheets, now wanted to become something he never had, a present father. And it all started with a doll, but now he wanted a heart that would beat in response to his. And now I ask you, how many times have you judged something you didn't understand? How many times have you stopped yourself from feeling, out of fear of what others might say? Richard's story shows us that true love can be born in the most unexpected places, and that rebuilding your life even after 70 is an act of bravery. He proved that real fatherhood doesn't require genetics. It requires devotion. This video isn't just about a reborn baby. It's about empathy, about healing, about reconnecting with what truly matters. Maybe you too carry an emotional void inside. Maybe you're also waiting for the right moment that never actually comes. And what if your chance to love is where you least expect it? Think about that. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever experienced an unusual kind of love? Have you ever done something everyone judged, but that healed you inside? Share it here in the comments. Let's create a space where we can talk, recognize ourselves, and support each other. And if this story touched you, give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Because there are more real, bold, and transformative stories on the way.